If you would go ahead and turn to Matthew 9, we're going to be starting there in Matthew 9. Uh, a very powerful moment here that I don't think it will be one that I'm sure you've read before, thought about before. The chapter is very busy. And in fact, the events before the chapter, a lot going on, lots of miracles happening. Um, Even the calling of Matthew earlier in the chapter, and as you get down to toward the end of the chapter, you see about verse 35 picking up, where he's going through all the villages and the cities, teaching in the synagogue. It says he's proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom, healing every disease, every affliction. It's kind of synopsis like this, where Jesus' ministry is put into perspective, and you try to get a handle on all that's going on, all that he's doing, so much that he did. John's gospel, describes if we tried to write it all, the books wouldn't contain it. There's just so much going on, and you see verses like this from time to time that just allude to all these things that are not recorded, events that happen that we don't know about. So it's in the midst of all of this that we see him in verse 36, looking out and seeing the crowds. The text there in verse 36 says, he had compassion for them because they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. Harassed and helpless, sheep without a shepherd. I want to reflect on that phrase this morning, make a few points about that. We'll draw from some of the other verses in just a moment, but for right now, just think about the idea there of Jesus seeing the crowds and seeing them in this way, sheep without a shepherd. That's a very sad picture. That's a very sad picture. It's interesting how often the Bible uses the picture of the sheep and the shepherd, constantly drawing from that. In fact, we made the point in our Moses study that Moses was trained as a shepherd. He lived as a shepherd for several years, and then the language is him shepherding the people through the wilderness. That's the image there. But we see even before that, Abraham and the patriarchs were shepherds. Um, and then obviously we see it in a very powerful way with David, King David, growing up as a shepherd and then being pictured as a shepherd for God's people. And it's at that point, and if you remember, you go through the prophets. Oftentimes, the kings beyond David are referred to as shepherding the people, being shepherds of God's people. That's the image that we're constantly being given in the scriptures, and we know uh, from John's gospel and from other places as well that Jesus is referred to as the good shepherd. He's the good shepherd, and we'll turn to that in a minute and reflect on some things there. But here, as we're getting started, just think about the the emotion of what Jesus is reflecting on here. Here are these people that have no shepherd. They have no one to guide them, no one to lead them beside still waters, no one to protect them. That was a big part of what the shepherds would do, would be to protect the flock, um, to take them where they needed to be. Um, the ideal of a sheep without a shepherd is a pathetic, sad thing. It's a hopeless thing. That's what Jesus sees that's how he sees the crowd. The other versions said distressed and downcast. Um, just thinking and obviously taking this to a spiritual place and realizing what that means. They have no guidance. They have no one to lead them in life, no one to protect them from the wiles of the devil. We talked about the wiles of the devil and the devil going about like a roaring lion looking to devour someone. We need that shepherd to protect us, to help us to escape. Um, there's so much imagery in this, so many thoughts that can come from that. And just again, seeing Jesus, recognizing as Jesus sees these crowds, it says he's moved with compassion. He's moved with compassion because they don't have a shepherd. They don't have this one guiding them and protecting them and leading them. Now, we don't run into a lot of shepherds in our day-to-day walk, but I was thinking of some kind of modern parallel, I guess, would be uh, just looking as you're going down the road sometimes and you see a poor little dog that's been dumped on the side of the road, and you can look at that animal and you can feel compassion on it. He has been abandoned, and some of them, if you've seen, I mean, it's pathetic. It's sad to see. They have no one feeding them, no one uh, loving them, and no one protecting them. The outlook for that animal is extremely bleak. Spiritually, obviously, that's where we are without the Lord, without God, without Christ as the Good Shepherd. That's where we are. We have no hope. We have no direction. We have no guidance. And certainly, as I've said, no protection. This obviously is the problem that so many in our society are in the same situation. That this was not unique to Jesus's generation. This was not unique to Jesus's time. This is something that mankind is. There's always people in every generation who are without a shepherd, that are refusing to look to a shepherd, or don't know about the shepherd. They have no divine guidance in their life. And we could describe this and think about this several different ways, but it's so easy. It's so easy to look out in our world and see people who are this way, distressed and downcast, no guidance, no direction, no hope. Without God in the world, it's an extremely sad situation. You can go to Ephesians 2, where it describes our situation before Christ, before Jesus, and that's the description. It's without God, without hope. That's where so many people are. We, in our day-to-day walk, in our just day-to-day life, we see people who have no shepherd. You see people, you interact with them all the time, who have no shepherd. And part of the point that I want us to get to in this lesson, and just reflecting on it, is how sad that is. How sad that is, and learn to see people with the compassion that Jesus saw them. That's as he looks at these people and he sees them, they do not have this shepherd, they do not have this protection, they do not have this guidance, and that's a sad thing. And we need to see them with compassion. To me, it's interesting that we can see that dog on the side of the road and be moved to compassion, and then sometimes see a person steeped in sin and not be moved to compassion. There's sometimes we don't have the emotional reaction that we should. We don't have the proper emotional reaction when we see someone as a sheep without a shepherd. Let's go back to the Old Testament for just a second. I want to just kind of plug in a couple of verses. First, just in Jeremiah 10. Jeremiah 10 is one that I learned in my memory work growing up, and it's a good verse to have in your mind. This is the picture of us without God. This is a picture of what it means if a person does not have the shepherd in their life. Jeremiah 10, verse 23 says, "O Lord, I know that the way of man is not in himself, that it is not in man who walks to direct his steps." This is a very powerful point because so many people in the world are trying to direct their own steps. They're trying to lean on the wisdom of the world. They're not looking to the Good Shepherd, and the reality that we cannot direct our own steps. The reality that a sheep without a shepherd is hopeless. Even that it may look like they're doing okay for a while. It may look like things are going all right for them, but without the shepherd, without the Good Shepherd, without the Lord in their life is hopeless. Their life is hopeless. It's so important for us to have that understanding and to be able to look at people, be able to look out at those that we interact with who don't have God in their life. If they don't have God in their life, they have no hope. They have no one to direct their life. It's not going to work. It is not going to work. I want you to take that thought with you to Zechariah. Let's go to the Old Testament prophet Zechariah. There's a couple of phrases here that connect to, and then I think add to this discussion a little bit. And I'm not going to go through the whole context. There's some things in here that I think would take too long to try to get our minds wrapped around. But just a few of the phrases here in Zechariah 10 verse 2, and really go back to verse 1. Verse 1: ask rain from the Lord in the season of the spring rain. Zechariah 10 verse 1. From the Lord who makes the storm clouds, he will give them showers and rain, to everyone the vegetation of the field. For the household gods utter nonsense, and the diviners see lies. They tell false dreams and give empty consolation. Therefore the people wander like sheep and are afflicted for lack of a shepherd. That verse, specifically verse 2 there, it uses that language, sheep without a shepherd, lack of a shepherd, and expands on it and gives us some thoughts. Wandering like sheep for lack of a shepherd. They have empty consolation, false dreams, diviners seeing lies, and their gods, the household gods, uttering nonsense. This is a picture of a person's life without God, trying to direct their own steps, not having a shepherd to lead and to guide and to protect. They're looking to whatever the world has to offer. And at that time period, it was idols, false gods. They were looking to that, and these gods were uttering nonsense, seeing lies, telling false dreams, giving empty consolation, a comfort that is of no comfort that has no meat to it, comfort that doesn't really do anything, empty comfort. And they're wandering again like sheep, afflicted for lack of a shepherd. Now obviously in this time, they were specifically looking to other gods, but the situation is the same. The situation is the same. People without Jesus, without the Lord, without God directing their steps, guiding their steps, they are going to get nonsense, lies, false visions, and empty consolations. They're going to get a bunch of stuff that cannot help them. And in fact, a lot of that, the lies, the nonsense, the empty comfort, those are all tools of Satan. In Levi's lesson last week, he was talking about how Satan corrupts things and twists things and turns the truth of God into a lie. That's what this is. That's what people who do not have the good shepherd in their life end up listening to these false things, these lies that have no true comfort, no true value. And it's such a sad situation. This is why when we see people without the shepherd in their life, we ought to feel compassion. And sometimes we feel disdain. Sometimes we feel superiority, maybe. We need to feel compassion when we see people who are living without God. Then the next verse, he says, they're afflicted for lack of a shepherd. But in verse 3, he says, my anger is hot against these shepherds. Oh, well, wait a minute. I thought the problem was lack of shepherds. What's going on? They've got shepherds that aren't doing their job. They've got shepherds that aren't being what God wanted them to be. The shepherds are the ones feeding them the lies. The shepherds are the ones giving them the empty hope. And that's almost worse. It is worse. You have, instead of just a complete lack of a shepherd where you're just wondering, you actually have somebody pretending to be a shepherd to tell you things that are empty and void of any meaning and purpose. Nonsense. And does that not really describe our society? You have a lot of people spouting off a lot of things, pretending to be delivering wisdom, pretending to be giving the guidance that you need. But if it's not grounded in biblical truth, if it's not grounded in what God said about it, what our good shepherd said about it, then it has no value at all. We're going to have to skip some of this just to draw the points for this lesson. Go forward to chapter 11. Chapter 11, verse 4. Thus says the Lord my God, become shepherds of the doomed flock to the slaughter. Those who buy them slaughter them and go unpunished. And those who sell them say, Blessed be the Lord, I have become rich. And their own shepherds have no pity on them. This again, to me, just adds to the desperation of the situation, where you have shepherds who they're shepherding a doomed flock, but part of the reason is because they're buying them to slaughter them. They have no love for them. They're becoming rich off of them, and the shepherds have no pity for them. It's just it's a bad situation where the sheep they're perishing for lack of a good shepherd, and the shepherds that are there are just exploiting the situation and leading them in wrong directions. There's some beautiful language in here where God is taking up the two staffs in verse 7, favor and union, and tending the sheep, and destroying the shepherds, verse 8. It's interesting, a lot of lessons in there, but for the purpose of this lesson, just come down to verse 16 and 17. In verse 16, he says, For behold, I'm raising up in the land a shepherd who does not care for those who are being destroyed, or seek the young, or heal the lame, or heal the maimed, or nourish the healthy, but devours the flesh of the fat ones, tearing off even their hooves. Again, that's painting an extremely bleak picture. And I think what you see there, you see the wisdom of the world, you see false religions, you see the lies of Satan, you see all the forces in this world that are offering false comfort, false hope, false religion, false truth, and they don't care. They do not care about the sheep. So then in verse 17, woe to my worthless shepherd who deserts the flock. May the sword strike his arm and his right eye. Let his arm be wholly withered and his right eye utterly blinded. Woe to the worthless shepherd. As we go forward with this lesson and we think about some of what we need to get from Jesus's reaction to the crowd and what he says there in Matthew 9, I want to keep this language in our mind is woe to the worthless shepherd. Woe to the one who doesn't care about the sheep, isn't interested in helping with the sheep. Woe to that one. So we'll keep leaning on that language a little bit. Let's go back to the New Testament now. Go to John chapter 10. John chapter 10, I alluded to this a moment ago. And again, we're just going to have to skim a little bit here. But in John chapter 10, he describes the sheep who hear his voice in verse 3. He calls his sheep by his name and leads them out. We referenced this several months back, thinking about how beautiful it is, just the simple fact that God knows us all by name. Of course, he knows the very numbers of the hairs of our head. I mean, it's a beautiful picture of God's care and concern that he knows every sheep by their name. Says the sheep follow him, verse 4, for they know his voice. This is a picture of a beautiful relationship where the shepherd, the true good shepherd, cares for his sheep. The sheep hear his voice. They're listening to him. But verse 5 says, a stranger they will not follow. They do not know the voice of the stranger. So where he's talking about the stranger here, think about the language there from Zechariah 10 and 11, the false shepherds, the worthless shepherds. They, I think, are described down in verse 8, where he says, all who came before me, thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the door. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved and will go in and out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundant. I think in that verse, specifically 9 and 10, in those verses, you see this stark contrast between the false shepherds, the false comfort, the shepherds that don't care, versus the good shepherd who came to give life, came to lay down his life for the sheep. Verse 11 says, verse 14, I am the good shepherd. I know my own and my own know me. Just as the Father knows me and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. A beautiful picture there of Jesus as the good shepherd. And this is the ideal I wanted to take us back to Matthew 9 with. As he sees the crowd there in Matthew 9, and he feels this compassion on them as a sheep without a shepherd, it's very powerful to remember that he was the good shepherd. Here was the good shepherd, the one that people could listen to, that people could turn to, the one. He's not a worthless shepherd. He cared for them and was about getting ready to lay down his life for them, as we saw there in John 9. But now he's seeing the crowd as a sheep without a shepherd. Why is that? How could the good shepherd see a bunch of people who were sheep without a shepherd? Because they weren't listening to his voice. They didn't hear his voice. That was the problem. They're harassed and helpless, or as we said earlier, distressed and downcast because they weren't turning to the good shepherd. They were not looking to him. And that's an extremely sad situation. And we are probably going to see that in our lives. We do see that in our lives where we're trying to represent the good shepherd, trying to point people toward the good shepherd, and they will not want to listen. They will not want to come. They'll want to stay in that lost situation. What you see next, I want to move forward and just make another point. He says to his disciples, as he has seen them as sheep without a shepherd and feeling this compassion for them, he says, the harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore, pray earnestly to the Lord of harvest to send out laborers into his harvest. So Jesus sees this sad situation, and he's wanting to address it. He's wanting to do what he can. And in fact, he has been doing what he could. He's been preaching the gospel. He's been doing everything that he could. And now he wants to, he's bringing attention to the situation. And he says, entreat the Lord of harvest that he may send out laborers into the harvest. Pray that God will send out workers. Pray that God will send people out to address this need. Man needs God. As we've said, man cannot guide himself. And so we look out and we see this desperation, and we need to feel compassion for it. And we need to pray that God would help send out workers. Pray that God would help address this need. This is a great point of application for us. We look out at the world and we need to see the need. We need to see the situation and the sadness of the situation. Be moved with compassion. Feel compassion for the people who have no shepherd. And then pray to the Lord of harvest. Pray to the Lord of harvest. Send forth workers. We need to be doing that. And we can do that with the people in our lives. And think about individuals. Think about people that you know that are like sheep without a shepherd. I think sometimes in this language, using this language, we have a tendency to just think about all the lost people in the world. And what I want you to do, what I want us to do, is think about the lost people that you know. Think about the lost people that you know. Think about the sheep that you interact with that have no shepherd. And pray to the Lord of harvest to address their needs. Pray to the Lord of harvest to send workers into their lives, that they can find the shepherd, that something will soften their heart to allow them to turn and start listening to the good shepherd that everyone needs to hear. To me, this is an important point. We make this point with a lot of things. It's a general point, but when we see a need and we're praying to address the need, we're praying for God, praying to God to address the need. Let's not forget to try to be part of the solution. And this is what you see right after he says, pray earnestly to the Lord of harvest to send out laborers into the harvest. The very next thing that happens in chapter 10 is he calls the 12 and he sends them out. He sends them out on what we often refer to as the limited commission. They're going just to the house of Israel. Verse 6 describes not even supposed to go to the Samaritans, but he's sending them out. He's sending out laborers into the field. This is a point that I think we need to get to, as I've said, recognize the need. People are like sheep without a shepherd. Recognize or feel compassion, be moved with compassion for them. Pray to the Lord of harvest. Pray to the Lord of harvest to address this need. But then let's try to be part of the solution. Let's try to get out there. And of course, Jesus, at this point, he's already been preaching. He's already been presenting the gospel. We saw that from verse 35. And just go before this event, and you see him constantly doing everything that he possibly can. But he is also now going to send out the apostles. He's going to send them out. So it's more than just pray to the Lord of harvest. He tells them, pray to the Lord of harvest, but then he sends them out. He sends them out to be workers. This is such an important point for us to understand. It's not enough just to recognize the need or even to be moved with compassion and pray. Those are all important things that need to be done. But if we stop there and we feel compassion for people, but we're not moved to try to reach them, not moved to try to present the gospel to them, that's extremely empty. James presents, that's telling your brother, go on your way, be warmed and filled, but then you don't do anything to address his needs. It's empty. It's of no real value. We could spend some time. In fact, let's turn real quick and just scan some verses in 1 Corinthians. This is a beautiful string of thoughts. We'll scan just a few verses, but in 1 Corinthians 2, Paul describes in verse 1 how he came to them, trying not making any effort to proclaim lofty speech or wisdom. Paul made no effort. He was not concerned with trying to sound good. What he wanted them to do was to rest their hope on Jesus. I decided to know nothing among you except Jesus Christ and him crucified. I was with you in weakness and in much fear, and in fear and much trembling. And my speech and my message were not with plausible words of wisdom, but in demonstration of the Spirit and of power, so that your faith would not rest on the wisdom of men, but on the power of God. Here, Paul's main focus in coming to them was to get them to listen to the Lord. Come down to verse 7, and you could read quite a few verses here, but he says, we impart a secret and hidden wisdom of God, which God decreed from the ages before. He goes on to say how we have the mind of Christ down in verse 16. And that's what he was trying to present. He was going around doing everything he could to be a harvester, to be a laborer. The Lord of harvest sent him out, and he was doing everything he could to present the mind of Christ, to be able to share the gospel. If you come down to chapter 4, verses 1 and 2, it says, this is how one should regard us. He's referring to himself and the other workers with him. Regard us as servants of Christ, stewards of the mysteries of God. And moreover, he says it's required of stewards that they be found faithful. So here Paul, in this text, is describing himself as a steward of the mysteries of God. That was his role, his job, was to be this laborer, to present the truth, to present the good shepherd to people. And that's what he was going around trying to do. You can see verse 16 of the same chapter where he says, I urge you then, be imitators of me. Be imitators of me. So this is the idea. And you can even read, he says, verse 17, that's why I sent Timothy, my beloved and faithful child in the Lord, to remind you of my ways in Christ as I teach everywhere in every church. So here, as Paul's going around trying to point people to the good shepherd, trying to give the sheep who don't have a shepherd the good shepherd, and he is wanting them to remember his ways and imitate him. Remember how I'm trying to share the gospel. I'm trying to point people to the good shepherd. Imitate me. Basically, what he's asking them is to be laborers, to be people who are pointing people to the good shepherd, to try to point them toward the one who is the solution to all of their problems. When we recognize the need and are moved with compassion, pray to the Lord of harvest, but then get up and start trying to be this laborer. Start trying to be the person who can point others toward God. Chapter 9 is a very powerful chapter to put on top of that. And I'll start reading in verse 16. 1 Corinthians 9, verse 16, I think is built on the foundation of what we just established. 1 Corinthians 9, verse 16. For if I preach the gospel, that gives me no grounds for boasting. For necessity was laid upon me. Woe to me if I do not preach the gospel. For if I do this of my own will, I have a reward. But if not my own will, I am still entrusted with a stewardship. What then is my reward? That in my preaching I may present the gospel free of charge, so as not to make full use of my right in the gospel. For though I am free from all, I have made myself a servant to all, that I might win them more. To the Jews I became a Jew in order to win the Jews. To those under the law I became as one under the law, though not being myself under the law, that I might win those under the law. To those outside the law I became as one outside the law, not being outside the law of God, but under the law of Christ, that I might win those outside the law. To the weak I became weak, that I might win the weak. I have become all things to all people, that by all means I might save some. I do it all for the sake of the gospel, that I may share with them in its blessings. As we look out at the people in the world who are as sheep without a shepherd, and we recognize that need, and I hope that we're moved with the proper compassion for the desperation of their situation, let's pray to the Lord of harvest to send forth workers, and then let's try to imitate Paul. Let's try to imitate Paul and try to figure out how to become all things to all men, not in any way violating the law. We're not saying to compromise our principles, but trying to become what we can in order to be a part of people's lives so that we can touch them with the gospel, so we can point them toward the good shepherd, so we can point them toward this one who can help them with this huge problem that they have as being a sheep without a shepherd. There's several texts that we could plug in on top of this. In fact, Ephesians 3. Turn over to Ephesians 3 real quick. We referenced this in a lesson not too long ago. Ephesians 3, where Paul is describing the fact that, again, you see the similar language as being a steward, verse 2. Ephesians 3 and verse 2. Stewards of God's grace that was given to him for them, to me for you, he says. How the mystery was made known to me by revelation, as I've written briefly. When you read, you can perceive my insight into the mystery of Christ. And he goes on to talk about that. He says, verse 8, to me, though I was the very least of the saints, this grace was given to me to preach the gospel, preach to the Gentiles, the unsearchable riches of Christ, and bring to light for everyone what is the plan of the mystery hidden for ages in God, who created all things. So again, if we're supposed to imitate Paul, and you think about this picture that he's describing, that he was given this information by revelation. He wrote it down. When we read it, we can understand it. He says of himself, woe to me if I don't preach the gospel, and I want you to imitate me. Woe to me if I don't preach the gospel, and you need to imitate me. So all of us need to look at ourselves and say, woe to me if I don't preach the gospel. Woe to me if I don't figure out how to make myself all things to all men, that I might by any means save some. This needs to be in our hearts. And if we're truly moved with compassion when we see those crowds as sheep without a shepherd, if we're truly moved with compassion, yes, pray about it. Absolutely pray about it. Pray every day about it. But then make sure you're trying to be the worker. Make sure you're trying to be one who is pointing others to Christ, who is pointing others toward this good shepherd, the only one who can help them. One other passage, 2 Timothy 2. And I think we could really add some passages on here. There's a lot of connections at this point, but 2 Timothy 2 and verse 2. And pick up in verse 1. This obviously is Paul writing to Timothy, one who he was encouraging to be a worker. You know, Paul was a worker, and he's encouraging Timothy to be a worker. And he says, so then you, my child, verse 1, be strengthened by the grace that is in Christ Jesus, and what you have heard from me in the presence of many witnesses, entrust to faithful men who will be able to teach others also. Share in suffering as a good soldier of Christ Jesus. So what's Paul's message to his apprentice, Timothy? Same thing he told the Corinthians: imitate me, join with me in sharing the sufferings of Christ. The things that you have received and heard and seen in me, entrust to others, that they can teach others also. And this is the pattern of the gospel, as we recognize so many people without a shepherd, so many people that aren't listening to the good shepherd, and the solution is us. The solution is us. Not that we can be the good shepherd. We can't be the good shepherd, but we can point them toward the good shepherd. And that's what God is asking for us all. So I think I've been through it right pretty well. Recognize the need. Make sure we recognize the need. Look at the people in this world who don't have a shepherd. Recognize the need. Feel compassion for them. Make sure that you feel compassion for them. Entreat the Lord of harvest. Send forth workers. Pray to him. God, please address the situation. Please let someone come into their life that can affect them, that can touch them, that can reach them with the gospel so they'll start listening to Jesus. Make yourself a worker. Make yourself a worker. Be the worker. Be the answer to that prayer of being the harvester that is needed in that person's life. And also, as we've seen Paul do, you could add a fifth thing: help others. Help others to be workers as well. Here, Paul, such an effective worker in the kingdom, he's very mindful of arming others for the same purpose, of helping the Corinthians to follow in his steps, of helping Timothy to follow in his steps. So this needs to be on our hearts as well, to help others entrust to faithful people who can teach others also, so that this cycle can continue. I appreciate your attention. I hope that these have been profitable thoughts for us to think about this morning. As we prepare to sing an invitation song, let's each one think about our soul's condition, think about whether or not we're in a right relationship with the Lord. Again, it's so easy to look at others and see the flaws in others' life and see, well, that person's clearly not listening to the Good Shepherd. That person's clearly not listening to Jesus. But a lot of times while we're so busy doing that, we're missing the beam in our own eye, the problems in our own life. So with this time, if you would take a moment to examine your soul, I think specific to the lesson, we could all ask ourselves, how well are we doing at being laborers in the kingdom? How well are we doing at pointing others toward the Good Shepherd, at feeling the proper compassion for others? If you need to make any changes in your life, if you need to make confession of wrong, please take advantage of this time as we stand and sing.